The stone mask is an important aspect of the story of the JOJO'S Bizarre Adventure original timeline. It was developed by the Pillar Men, who used it as a means to conquer the sun and evolve. It sets up the single most influential character in the entire story, one whose presence is felt or a direct plot source in every part. Dio is not only the main villain in parts 1 and 3. His actions are what set up part 2 with Strizo, Speedwagon, and the Stone Mask. In part 4, it is his influence which was why a stand arrow ended up in Morio. In part 5, he is the reason the main protagonist, Giorno Giovanna, is even born. In part 6, he is the originator of the Heaven Plan, which is the basis of the part 6 story. How would the story change if the Pillar Men never existed? What if the Stone Mask never existed? What if the story was different? We start at part 1. Everything goes as expected, however. There is one huge difference. Instead of a stone mask being on the wall, there is another archaeological wonder on the wall of Joestar Mansion. In the misty English countryside of the late 19th century, Jonathan Joestar lived a life of honor and quiet study. Among his most treasured possessions was an ancient artifact he had inherited years earlier that belonged to his late mother. An arrow of strange metallic design etched with symbols no scholar could decipher. One quiet evening, while examining its razor tip under lamplight, Jonathan accidentally pricked his finger. A surge of invigorating warmth flooded his veins, as though the very sun had risen inside his chest. He laughed it off as imagination and bandaged the tiny wound. He did, however, feel like this experience was a sign that he was close to understanding something. He could not really describe what it was. As he continued his documentation of his discoveries, he came across a letter from one Dario Brando. It described his illness and hardships. To Jonathan's surprise and horror, his symptoms of suffering matched exactly that of what was happening to his father. Using his intellect and instincts, he deduced that this was no mere coincidence. Jonathan left to find a cure. Meanwhile, Dio, desperate to shift blame and remain under his mask of a son and brother, knew of Jonathan's fascination with the arrow and stole it. He intended to use it to murder George. The weapon used would make Jonathan the prime suspect. In a haze of desperation, Dio thought this was a perfect plan. Speed up George's death and take Jonathan out too. 2 birds with 1 stone. Dio felt a flood of relief when learning that Jonathan was headed towards Ogre Street. Surely he would die. Surely. After Jonathan's return was announced, Dio panicked into a drunken stupor. Inconceivable. He lived. That stubborn Joestar snob survived and had Dio dead to rights. When he was outside wandering the street with a bottle gripped in his hand, trying to cope, trying to find a way to get out of his mess, a desperate Dio, armed with the arrow he stole, ended up using it against a drunkard in self-defense. However, the arrow had effects Dio never expected.
I barely cut him, yet he dropped dead, like his body couldn't handle it. Interesting, this arrow isn't merely a weapon.
He remembered noticing the bandage on Jonathan's hand. The cut isn't poisonous. No, it had different outcomes for different people. Dio's mind reeled, formulating and connecting ideas to conclude this arrow chose its victims. A small cut was nothing to Jonathan, but it instantly killed this scum.
Such a shallow cut. This world is not ruled by morality, but by worth. And I will decide what that means.
When Jonathan and his new ally Speedwagon confront Dio for his crimes, Dio decides to act. In a last-ditch attempt at salvation, he plunged the arrow into his own chest. Maybe it would grant him a swift, merciful death. It was worth a try, given his current circumstances. to spare him the embarrassment of imprisonment or trial. It disgusted Dio to go out this way, but his pride would much rather choose death than the rope or a dirty cell. He had nothing to lose and nothing to gain. Desperation clouded reason and humanity. Dio plunged the arrow into his skin, piercing it with hatred and purpose. His will absolute in that moment. He refused to be seen as a cowering victim or a fool who did not plan for such outcomes. He refused to believe that an oaf like Jonathan and his new street rat friend bested him in a living game of chess. However, something unforeseen happened. Rather than reeling over and dying, a being appeared behind Dio, a twisted mess of thorns and vines, and it had a crown of thorns upon its head like a twisted mockery of Christ. It was strange, only Dio could see it, but everyone could feel it.
Crown of Thorns!
Dio had awakened a stand, born from his desire of control, of perception, his will, his absolute priority in the moment, absolution. To Jonathan's utter shock, the guns of the policemen turned slowly, away from Dio, towards him. His eyes widened. Even Speedwagon looked at him with disgust and hatred.
Dio, what have you done to them? You took their self-control, their autonomy!
Dio laughed, triumphant and absolute.
I've simply removed the illusion, Jojo. Free will is nothing more than a burden for the weak.
Instead of fearing for his life, Jonathan gritted his teeth. He stepped forward towards the readied barrels of the guns staring at him. He looked right at Dio's invisible monster. Dio snarled, wondering if Jonathan was simply stupid for thinking he could do anything. But the way his eyes wandered, he could see Dio stand. And he stood tall, proud. Then he proclaimed,
"Then I will carry that burden for them!"
A glowing golden light emanated from Jonathan. Its shine made the officers and Speedwagon falter momentarily. Dio clenched his fist, hard enough to leave red marks on his palms. Jonathan noticed the golden apparition appear beside him, mirroring his imposing, bold stance.
Dio! The arrow. It appears to have given us both Silence! This is not fair! I gain mythical power, and of course fate gives you some sort of equalizer! Shoot him now!
The bullets blast through the air, then drop to the ground. Jonathan's stand had fully manifested. Sunlight, yellow overdrive. A manifested being similar to Dio's. A golden knight of divine stature, powerful and noble like his master. Now they are truly on equal footing. And everyone else in the room is struggling between the golden light of Jonathan and the corrupting thorns of Dio.
It matters not! I have dominion over will itself! How do you possibly hope to stop me? You are all alone.
Speedwagon gets ready to strike, but stops in his tracks as Jonathan turns to him. To Dio's surprise, Jonathan uses his stand to strike Speedwagon. Dio laughed.
You attack your own friends! This is too easy! Where is your honor, Jonathan? Did you piss it away out of desperation, or because I, Dio, have already won?
But the punch doesn't move Speedwagon. It ripples through his body.
Speedwagon, I know you're still there. I will not destroy you! I will remind you who you are!
In an instant, Speedwagon's hat slices through the guns around them, regaining his will while in the presence of Jonathan's golden light.
Useless! 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 I'll just end you myself! Goodbye, Jojo!
Their ideological war raged across the Joestar estate and beyond. Jonathan fought for family and humanity. Dio fought to corrupt and rule. Their colossal stands clashed fists and feet. Dio's crown of thorns spreading wildly, affecting people in the vicinity, making them help, jump in front of attacks, give their lives for him as sacrificial lambs just so Dio can get another hit in. The house they grew up in was being destroyed, debris and fire filling the room, rubble crumbling across the ground.
Dio, stop this madness! Our home! It's being destroyed!
Dio did not falter in his attack.
Your home! I am beyond such meaningless materials. You cling to your pathetic honor and family. This is not mere rivalry, JoJo! This is destiny manifested! This power, it's the will to protect. I have strength! Strength in my heart that beats for justice! Sunlight yellow overdrive! Cleanse a path for clarity!
After landing a critical strike, his raw power and determination too much for Dio to handle, they both stood alone, flames consuming their home, both within the last breaths of their life. But Jonathan's will prevailed. He stood tall over his defeated brother. Dio would not yield the battle though it was lost. His stubborn nature and ego would not let him admit defeat, especially not at the hands of one he deemed unworthy of the power they had. But his body was broken, burned and charred and clinging onto life. He looked at Jonathan with pure hate. Venom and spite spilled out where his blood should have been. Jonathan tried to save Dio from the raging fire about to consume them both. Despite everything, he still tried. But the falling beams of splintering wood and the fire consuming all in its path made it impossible. Low on energy, Jonathan had to make the hard decision to save himself while he could and had to escape, and had the rest of his life to live. Dying to save Dio was not a choice that would be good for the world. His corruption, even after a short time, got so many people killed, destroyed so much. Jonathan had no choice but to go. With Dio seemingly gone, Jonathan believed the nightmare had ended. He destroyed the arrow which brought such misery and ruin to his life. But unknown to him, it had only begun.